evening. This is Lisa Picker for Carroll County Public Library. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. For more information, please visit National Alliance on Mental Illnesses website, NAMI.org. That's NAMI.org. Remember, you are not alone. Joining us tonight are Lindsey, Weigle, author and partner with Blue Water Advisory, and Ted Zaleski, reader, friend, and Director of Management and Budget for Carroll County. Lindsey is a partner with Blue Water Advisory, which brings clarity, purpose, and action to its clients through recruitment, leadership training, consulting, and coaching to businesses of all sizes across the U.S. She has a degree from Central Michigan University in interpersonal communication and public communication with a minor in marketing. Lindsey is an avid Detroit Red Wings fan and currently lives near Frederick with her husband, Gabe, and her daughter and son. Enough Already shares the journey of her bumpy path from living a life of stress, guilt, frustration, and chaos to finding peace, joy, and confidence within herself. Write any comments or questions in the comments, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the talk. Please join me in welcoming Lindsey and Ted.
Okay. Did I just see a cattail?
You did. You did. That's the world I live in right now, Ted. She is always right here, and I'm just managing her to the side. Yes.
There's a dog and two cats in here, so you never know.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Lindsey's book, and you can see I've spent a little bit of time.
Sure have, Ted.
Thinking about your book and you.
Looks like my edited copies, man. You put some work in. I appreciate that.
I've got a lot to talk about. In fact, more than we probably can possibly get to. So I have to figure out which things make it and which don't.
You got it.
I want to start off with the title, Enough Already. Now, as we talk more, I'm sure you'll be getting to this idea. Enough already means one of the things you figured out was you are already enough. You don't need to be more, and you want that message to other people. So enough already.
Yes.
It also occurred to me that as you're working through things, some of you was saying, okay, I've got to stop this. And I thought, enough already, like, okay, that's it, stop. So was that in your mind?
It absolutely was. So Ted, it is a very strange story, to be honest. So, and as you mentioned, we'll talk about the journey, but sort of on the other side of the journey that I experienced, I literally got out of the shower one day and the title Enough Already hit me. And I sort of saw all the milestones that I had gone through, and the book sort of just willed its way out of me. It just sort of happened, which I don't think is something that happens much to most authors. But yeah, the Enough Already really resonated with me. So it sort of just arrived, but it is both this idea of I am enough, right? I don't have to prove it. I don't have to earn it. I don't have to, it's not a need for external validation of others telling me I'm enough, that I really am just enough as I am. But that the journey that got me to realize that was having enough already of the chaos and the stress and all of the frustration that I had experienced. So it really does work both ways, but I can't honestly take credit for the title because it was just sort of gifted to me from the universe. So, but it works. So.
Well, always nice to get a gift.
I agree. Agreed.
Okay. So as I was trying to learn a little bit about you, I ran across somebody named Jacqueline who said, "Fire up, Chips."
Ah, yeah.
I'm wondering, is there a story behind that? Was Chips a nickname?
No. So actually, so I went to, as she mentioned, I went to Central Michigan University, and their slogan, we are the Chippewas, and the slogan is "Fire up, Chips."
Okay.
And so I know Jacqueline from Central Michigan University. So yes. It's the call of fellow Chippewas to each other.
Okay. Yep. Makes sense. Hey, I want to kind of, Lisa talked about Mental Health Month, and I wanted to kind of dive into that portion of this. Now, you refer at points in this to a nervous breakdown. Mm-hmm. And you also refer to burnout.
Yes.
Now, a nervous breakdown, I think historically, it's a term that's kind of been stuck on women and kind of tied to ideas of hysterical women and things like that. And if a man had a nervous breakdown, it was kind of a sign of weakness, maybe even being too womanly.
Mm-hmm.
Burnout is maybe more gender neutral, but both of those terms, if you talk to mental health professionals, they're going to say, there's no nervous breakdown, there's no burnout. Those are just different names for other mental illnesses. It could be depression, anxiety, or other things. And then there's an interview I did once, a lady named Susanna Cahalan. She wrote a book called The Great Pretender, and she also wrote one called Mind on Fire. Mind on Fire was about a problem she was going through. Are you familiar with it?
I think it was a movie. I think I saw that movie.
A Brain on Fire.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I listened to the audiobook, I think. It was really good. It was really, really good. Yeah, it was an audiobook I listened to.
But one of the big things that came out of that for her, they eventually found a specific physical cause to what was her mental illness. But then in The Great Pretender, she's investigating this attempt people made to send people without problems into mental institutions to find out what would happen.
Okay.
And we don't have time to get into the whole story, but then she gets into kind of distinguishing, or rather the distinction we make between mental illness and physical illness, and how unable we really are to kind of document that. If somebody says depression, there's kind of, okay, well, you need to pull yourself together. Yeah. If you have cancer, nobody would say, snap out of it, get over this. Okay, so I just said a lot, more than I usually would say, but I wanted to get some of those ideas out there so that you could talk about what you went through, what you wrote, and how it relates to all that stuff.
Yeah. So, the reality was that I was operating at a capacity way above what I should have been. I was operating just at such a level that just wasn't sustainable. I was trying to do it all. I was trying to be it all. I was trying to put a smile on my face and have a perfectly clean house and be the perfect mom. And I was trying to be all the things to everyone else, which I eventually learned was in order to feel that validation from other people, right? Is to feel enough. Was to get that external validation from others. And I was trying to do it by earning it or proving it to other people and hearing them say it back to me. And in order to chase that fulfillment of my enoughness tank, as I talk about it in the book, I really was I was operating so over capacity for any sort of actual functional level or enjoyment of your life. And so, I do sort of use the terms nervous breakdown and burnout interchangeably. I think mainly I use the term nervous breakdown because I think we use the term burnout pretty casually these days. Like, oh, I'm so burnt out, right? And what I experienced was so much more than just I need an evening off. It really was this total life altering sort of 2 or 3 days where everything just sort of snapped and I walked around in a daze, and I really, in full disclosure, I remember being in the bathroom floor after I sort of had this wave of nothingness wash over me, and I sort of burst into tears, and I just cried for hours. And I remember thinking oh my gosh, this might be a nervous breakdown. And if it is, I wonder if my insurance company would pay for me to go somewhere for a couple of days, just to rest for a couple days. And I thought, okay, if your idea of of something exciting is being able to check yourself in somewhere for 3 days, maybe you need to get your life under control in a bit of a better way. And so at that point, I realized I really needed to shift the way that I was operating and how I was looking at life and how I was interacting with my own life and how I saw myself and the pressure I was putting on myself. And so it really was. And so when I went to a therapist afterwards, and she said, you know what you're describing, she said, we don't use the term nervous breakdown anymore. She said, we call it burnout. And so that's, I guess, what she told me it was called. But at the same time, I think we use that as such a generic term of when you're tired, that this was so much more than that. It was such a life altering experience. It felt like much more than I've just had too much on my plate for the past few days, kind of tired. So I do use them interchangeably. I'm not a therapist, a psychologist. I'm not a mental health expert, right? I'm just a lady who had an experience and is sharing it. But that, I guess those are the reasons I use those two terms, is because I do think it was much bigger than burnout, but I think burnout's something most people can relate to on some level.
Yes. In your job, there's a tool you use called DISC for behavior assessments.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect you're probably what's called a high I. Is that
I
right?
am a raging high I, Ted. I am a 93 I, Ted. Yes, I am.
Do you think that plays any part in how this all played out for you?
I think a person who, so a high I is tends to be a people pleaser, right? As we learn about in DISC, certainly. But I think our high Ds who are our go-getters and make things happen, I think high Ds could burn out. I think it's really about our understanding of ourselves. I think probably our self-awareness of how, so it's probably more in the EQ space, our ability to be, self-aware, the ability to self-regulate, the ability to create boundaries, probably has more to do with it, I would think, than your DISC style. I would bet just about any DISC or driving forces, for that matter, could experience the same thing or could create better boundaries than I did. But I certainly had I have a people pleasing gene in me for sure.
Right. Yeah. Now, this was not a question that I had prepared. I just thought about this as you said that. The idea of people pleasing. Then a theme throughout the book is your need for recognition and validation and people to say, oh, it's amazing what you're doing.
Correct.
Those aren't quite the same thing, but do they kind of go together?
They probably complement each other well, right? A natural propensity to want to make people happy, and then trying to fulfill that enoughness void by making other people happy. So they probably are pretty complementary of each other. But again, I really think that regardless of, the DISC being introverted, extroverted, task-oriented, people-oriented, all that stuff, I think anyone can experience that. It's really about, for me, and here's the other thing is my goal in sharing my story. It's certainly not a self-help book in the traditional sense of here's 5 steps to avoid this, or here's 5 ways to, to avoid burnout. It really was to share some real truths that I think most people are experiencing. As I started to write the book and I started to share sort of first drafts with people, I heard over and over again, my circumstance is very different than yours. Maybe I don't have kids, or maybe I'm a man. But the themes that you're talking about, the feelings that you describe, are exactly the things I have I've struggled with, and that I've connected to. So I think really it goes across genres of types of people. I think it goes across gender. I really do. The feedback I've heard from people is this is a much more common experience. This need to get this external validation and to be able to try to earn our way into happiness, as opposed to being okay with sort of recognizing that, to sitting in your own enoughness and being okay with where you're at. I think it extends across genres, genders, and life circumstances, to be honest.
Another thing you talk about a lot is guilt.
Yes.
And comes up repeatedly, comes up in different ways. At one point you talk about hundreds of pounds of guilt. So if you weigh 100 pounds or so and you're carrying around hundreds of pounds of guilt, that's probably a bit of a problem. Now, as I was going through the book, I'd already read it, and I was reading it the second time and starting to think about some things. And I remember thinking, okay, there's probably less guilt in the second half of this book than the first half. So I was actually keeping track of pages.
Okay.
And it turned out I was wrong.
Oh.
There was more guilt in the second half than the first, but it changed. The guilt changed.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think I saw, and this is where I'm going, is I want to hear if this is something that was on your mind, or if maybe it just evolved naturally. But in the beginning, the talk about guilt was kind of this weight or burden, that hundreds of pounds of guilt. Mm-hmm. And then you get further in, and it becomes about not just feeling guilt, but managing the guilt. How do I try to not just let this happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
But then near the end, what it becomes is a very conscious using of guilt as an alert or an alarm. Okay, there's
like
something happening.
Guilt is my superpower. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up too. Yes. So can you talk about, was that a conscious progression on your part, and then talk about your guilt as a superpower?
Yeah. So So the reality is that, I mean, Ted, I was a master at feeling guilt. I mean, I remember getting up with the kids in the morning and getting them breakfast and trying to get myself ready for work. And I was taking a shower and I felt so guilty. The tape I was playing in my head was like, well, you know, I was like, oh my gosh, like the kids are watching cartoons while I'm in the shower. Like a better mom would have gotten up earlier so that she could have taken a shower before the kids got up so that I could be spending this 10 minutes with the kids, playing with them and being a good mom instead of being super selfish and taking a shower right now. Right. That is an unhealthy guilt tape. if a shower makes you feel that amount of guilt. And so but it was these tapes that played in my head about what a good mom did, what a good friend did, what a good wife did, what a good business partner did. So I had all these sort of preconceived tapes that played in my head about what all that looked like and whether or not I was living up to it is really what I was sort of this litmus test that I was using for myself on everything. And I didn't think of it as even as that I was comparing myself to it. I just thought that was the base of what you needed to do to be a good person. And so I began to realize how unhealthy and how not realistic asking perfection out of yourself in every single second is. And so what I began to do is to consciously change those tapes. Is when I recognized the tape that I was playing that, well, a good mom would have gotten up earlier. I recognized like that is a tape that you're telling yourself, right? That is something that is a pressure you're putting on yourself that you can either choose to buy into or you can choose a different tape. And so it became a very conscious effort to at first change just the tape that I was playing. I didn't always believe it, right? I still felt the guilt in the beginning. I still felt the guilt, but I was like, no, I'm not buying into that. And one pivotal moment for me in the journey was there's a section in the book that's called 4 Pieces of Pie. And there's a famous quote. It had come out, I saw it on Facebook right before Mother's Day. And there's a famous quote that says, a good mother, seeing that there are 4 pieces of pie for 5 people, proudly declares she never did care for pie. And it was such a huge sort of wake up call to me to say that there's all of like, is that true? Like, is that what a good mom is? In order to be a good mom, do I have to say I don't like pie? Like, not only do I not get to eat pie, but like I have to tell everyone I don't like it. And then I just have to sit around while everyone else eats pie. And if I like pie, that doesn't seem like a very good way to live my life, right? Is to always be sacrificing those things that I want and I need in life. Because one of 2 things happens is, right, either you eventually get tired of not having pie or you get resentful of those that are eating the pie. And so I really had to recognize, like in those moments, that the guilt tape was that what I was saying to myself was a guilt tape that I could either choose to buy into or I could choose a different tape. And so it became this very strategic, intentional choice to say, I'm not buying into that tape. That tape does not apply here. And this is my 4 pieces of pie moment, right? And, good moms we could make another pie, or we could make 4 pieces into 5 pieces. Like there's lots of different ways that all of us can have pie here. And so my goal really became to say, how do I make sure that I am a part of this group that gets pie too? And so what was interesting is that as I began to change the tapes, even if my belief in them didn't necessarily buy in, I worked really diligently just to say that's not true. Like this, like we're changing the way that we operate because where that tape got you did not get you to a good space. So we need to change this tape to a new direction. And one morning I was getting ready for work and I saw all these clothes at the end of my bed that had been folded that needed to be put away. And I was like, oh, I'll take care of those when I, get to the, when I get home from work. And I thought, and I had this moment where I was like, that's the first time I think I'd ever had a thought where normally my tape would have been, oh, you're such a messy housekeeper. Like, why weren't you more responsible? You should have gotten those put away already. You're such a slob, right? All those negative tapes that I would have been playing. And instead I thought, oh, let's put those away later. And it was this gradual realization that the guilt of those tapes eventually began to lift after I had intentionally changed them to new and healthier tapes.
Back when you were talking about the pie, at one point you said, being resentful of the other people eating the pie. But you also talked with pie and with other things, not just resenting that they were having the pie and you weren't, but that they weren't recognizing that you gave up eating the pie or whatever else was going on.
Correct. Yeah. And so it's, a bit of that martyr syndrome, right? Like I want to be recognized for how hard I'm working. I want to be recognized for the sacrifices I'm making. But when you proudly announce you don't like pie, why would anyone recognize you for not eating pie? I mean, you're setting yourself up for failure. And for me, at least, I was setting unrealistic expectations for myself. I was creating unrealistic expectations of those around me, putting far too much pressure on them to make me feel like I was enough, when really that was my job to figure out. My job to figure out that I was enough, and to be able to more freely and more lovingly and more joyfully interact with my life and those in it. So
Yeah, now you brought up the good mom, and when we say good mom here, it's capital G, capital M, good
yeah.
mom. And this is an idea that I was not specifically familiar with until I actually, it's another interview I did with a woman named Angie Kim, a book called Miracle Creek.
Okay.
And in there, the book focuses on some women who have autistic children, and this idea of the good mom and what a good mom would do for her children is central to the book. So it was interesting when that came up again in the same sort of way for me.
It is a real thing that I think a lot of people know, even though maybe we don't talk about what that looks like as much as they do in the quote of a good mom in the pie. But I think that there's a very big undertone. But I think it also applies to more than just good mom. I think it's, well, if I'm a good wife, I'll go do this, or if I'm a good friend, I will do this, or as a good employee, right? We put these labels around behaviors of what that good looks like, and these standards that we're trying to live up to, these external standards that we denote as the places we need to get to.
So it came up a couple times that you went to Central Michigan University.
I did.
I went and looked at their notable alumni list, and you're not on it.
How is that possible, Ted? How is that possible?
So I'm starting a petition. Anybody who's watching who would like to sign up to get Lindsey on the notable alumni.
We'll call them.
Okay. At one point in the book, you talk twice about observing your life, but in very different ways. And this was within 7 pages of each other.
Okay.
The first one you said, I was simply an observer of my life. And when you said that, it was a very, I've become detached from my life. I'm looking at myself from outside my body.
Mm-hmm. That was right after I had my bathroom moment, right after I had that sort of like nervous breakdown. The next few days I was in this fog where I really didn't feel connected to my body. I was just sort of figuring out what was going on. Yeah.
Right. And then the second one you said, I became a Lindsey sociologist of sorts, working to observe my life.
Yes.
So again, you're talking about observing yourself, but in a very different way here. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it wasn't like beginning of the book and end of the book. They came pretty good, close together. I don't know if it's something you were conscious of, but now that I brought it up, at least, can you talk about kind of the difference between observing yourself that you mean in those two ways? Yeah.
So the first one very much was I had really no functionality of what was going on those days. I felt like I was in this, like I was living underwater, and everybody else was sort of on the other side of the pool. And it was a very strange feeling to just really be in this daze that I had really. It was like it's like some sort of like dam inside me broke in my burnout or nervous breakdown, and it took me a while to sort of like find myself again. And then shortly after that, I had to go to Atlanta and speak at a conference in front of 100 CEOs, and it gave me some time to sort of reconnect, to get a little bit of space and do a little bit of thinking and just processing about what had transpired over the last few days. And what I realized is that what had gotten me, the behaviors that I thought were the right ones, being a good mom, being a good wife, being a good friend, the ones that I had held so tightly to as this is how I'm going to find my happiness, hadn't worked. And so I realized that I really just needed to take a step back and see, like, what is going on in my life, right? I was on this sort of automatic pilot in life. I was just going from task to task, activity to activity, kid thing to kid thing, email to email, client to client. I was just sort of trying to survive the life that I had at that time. And so I just decided that I was just going to take a step back and try to look at what were those things I was telling myself, what were those things that were so powerful, what really was going on, in my life? Was I enjoying my life? Was I connected to my life? Was there joy in my life? Because, my kids are 20 months apart. And so it was a very chaotic time. And I feel like I was just sort of in this survival mode. And so it really became about just, let's look at what's going on. Like, is this the kind of life you want to live and you want to create and that you want to cultivate for your family? So instead of making big, giant, drastic changes to my life, I was like, I'm just going to sit back and take a real look. I'm going to be more intentional about what's going on and pay attention to my life in a way that I hadn't ever really before.
Yep. And actually, there's a point in the book where you ask the question, am I creating the life I want or managing the one I've got?
That has become it's a quote I have printed. It sort of appeared to me one day, and that's sort of become my life mantra. Is I think it's really easy to get swept up in the things of life, and especially during a global pandemic when things are so chaotic and there's so many things that are pulling at us. I spend a lot of time coaching individuals professionally, and I hear the same story from them over and over again. It's just this idea of like, I wake up and I sort of like blast through my day and I collapse on the couch at the end of it. And sometimes I don't even know what I've done that day. I think so often we spend our lives in that circle of that whirlwind. And so it really forced me to say, you only have so many days on this planet, right? This is all we've got while we're here. And so do I want to be caught up in the reacting to the world that's spinning around me, or do I want to take more control and engage in my life in a way that is meaningful and that I find joy in, and I find happiness in, and I find connectedness in? So,
this is another question I hadn't prepared, just reacting to something you were saying there. Going through what you did and you talking to so many people and hearing some of the reactions you've gotten from other people, do you feel like this made you understand other people in a way that maybe you couldn't have before all this happened to you?
I mean, I think that it's given me a way to talk about it, certainly, in a way, and have much more meaningful and wonderful conversations. One of the best parts of this book journey has really been hearing from people that read the book and say, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I've gone through the exact same thing." It's like you're in my brain writing down, what's going through my head, and to be able to hear other people share their journeys. And not everyone is surrounded by guilt. One of my very first book readers, she talks about how she doesn't get her stress doesn't show up as guilt. Her stress shows up as anxiety, right? And really like high levels of anxiety and being very stressed out. So I think these themes, what it shows up and looks like in other people, can be very different, but sort of the core root of what's going on seems to be very similar with a lot of people. And it's been so wonderful to be able to have somebody read even a vignette or read the book and come to me and say, I have lived this life. I feel every word of this book. Like, thank you for giving me the opportunity to recognize, like, I'm not alone in this journey, and that I'm not alone in this experience. And I talked to my girlfriend about it, and I've given this book to my mom already. And to be able to open up conversations about things that are apparently so common, but hardly any people are willing or that not as many people talk about. So having a platform to be able to talk about the realities that we're all experiencing has been such a wonderful part of the book, for sure.
Yeah, and part of that, something I've heard you say now, is you want to help people feel like it's okay to talk about it.
It is. And so in the back of the book, there's actually a handful of questions that are used to sort of facilitate conversation. So either whether it's in like a book club or whether, you read it and then your girlfriend reads it, to be able to talk about some of those questions. I've actually started on the Enough Already social media pages. I do sort of 10 to 15 minute interviews with individuals that have read the book and that it's resonated with, and they share their story about, what struggles have they had. I had one woman sort of share her bathroom moment with us, where she has this, this full meltdown at her son's soccer game. And just that she said, I've never told anyone that story before. And here she's telling it to me in a Zoom interview that's going to be on Facebook. And I think that just the ability to say, what's the most interesting, Ted, is what people say to me all the time is, I can't believe how vulnerable you were in this book. I can't believe the things you shared. And I think, this isn't vulnerable. This is something everyone is experiencing. It's just no one's talking about it, right? So I think of it as just a really great opportunity for us to recognize that we are much more alike in many of these ways than we are different. And when we can share and make it make it okay to talk about our struggles, then it really does make our struggles that much easier.
Now, this is not a funny book.
Okay. Okay.
But you did make me laugh once.
Okay. Oh man. What did I say, Ted?
You went to a therapist.
Yes.
And then you say, she sighed. Oh man, I thought to myself, I've exasperated my therapist. That can't be good. And I was thinking, here she is going to a therapist, and she's trying to be good at going to a therapist.
Correct, right? Yeah. I wanted to impress my therapist, and I'd exasperated her, and that made me concerned. Right, exactly.
Now, you talk about life a lot, not the idea of life, but you talk about life like there's some person or thing or entity that's interacting in your life.
Yeah.
You know, it comes up a lot. There's one you say, I could see that life had grown tired of trying to teach me a lesson. Life is a stubborn teacher. Life doubles down. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of life as you're using it?
Yes. So, I mean, I think you could really use, I think everyone sort of has a different word for it, right? Whether you call it, and I think I talk about this in the book too. It's you can call it life, you can call it the universe, you can call it God, you could call it Buddha, you whatever your belief is sort of this like bigger, higher power, is sort of how I use the term of life. Because I do think that it's, you know, like everybody has their own interpretation of it. And so for me, it's about really recognizing that over the course of my life, I very much experienced that I feel that, you know, the path that I've been put on, or the experiences that I've encountered, sort of give me a lesson that they want me to learn, or that life wants me to learn. And I, you know, maybe I don't want to learn it because it's hard. It's a hard lesson to learn. And so I sort of avoid it, or I walk around it. But that learning that lesson never really goes away. And what I've learned over the course of my life is that the faster you deal with that lesson, and the faster you learn the lesson, the easier the lesson is to learn. And life doesn't have to continue to teach you that lesson over and over again, because every time you have to be taught the lesson, it gets bigger, it gets louder, it gets a little meaner, it gets a little harsher. So I'm learning as I get older, that if I can learn it a little faster, it usually causes me a little less pain. So I'm still working on that. But I think of life as the entity or the being, in whatever form that is, that sort of guides us around.
So you went 35 years or so being a very bad student before you finally learned.
Ted, actually, I could write a whole nother book about my 20s. And so there was some laying the foundation. I just didn't learn enough of the lesson. Yes, I didn't learn enough of the lesson until my mid 30s, for sure. Yes.
You have a group of friends that you referred to as your wolf pack.
Wolf pack.
Yes. I was wondering, Megan Rapinoe wrote a book called Wolf Pack. Was that a reference to her book, or is just chance?
No. It's, you know, I don't even know. I have we sort of a random grouping of girls that came together, and I think one day I was like, he's like our little wolf pack, man, and so it just kind of stuck. So they're my fabulous friends who guide and help and support and love me. And I have lots of friends who do that too, outside of just my wolf pack. But this is a particular group of 4 of us that all live near each other at this point now. So
you might want to check out this book. I think you like
I will.
Megan Rapinoe, the big soccer player.
Yeah.
And the book is called Wolf Pack, but then it has a longer title. But if you
all right, I will check it out.
Rapinoe, Wolf Pack, you'll get to it.
Yeah, man.
Now, earlier, you talked about, you think this crosses genders. And this is something I actually was thinking about a lot. Yeah, this is a book by a woman about a woman. There are other people in the book who are almost all women.
That's true.
Your husband shows up a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure there was another man in the whole book that I can remember, at least. Then, you know, I've looked at comments that people have made about your book.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying I did an exhaustive survey, but best I can remember, they were all comments by women.
Yeah, probably. There's probably my dad in there, but yeah, yeah.
Okay. So even though you said this crosses over, I want to go back to that, and I want to ask you, you know, do you think that this is a book for men just as much as it is for women, or do you think there are differences that are just fundamental to making this more for women. Like, for example, it occurs to me, we talked about the good mom idea. Clearly, you can be a good father or not a good father, but the idea of good father with a capital G, capital F, I don't think is there the same way good mom is.
So I'm not a dad, so I don't know that that's true, but I would think that it's a great question, Ted. It really is, because I think I'll finish the thought on the good father, but I think that I think that sometimes there's societal pressures for men to be breadwinners, or there's societal pressures for men to be really tough. Like you just said earlier, like men can't have a nervous breakdown because, right? And so I think that there are some things, they may not think of it in that capacity, but I think that there are certainly pressures men still feel societally about what it means to be a man and how to behave and what they can do and what they can't do, what it means to be a good man. I think that there certainly are those very similar. They may look a little bit different, again, as to what those behaviors look like, but I certainly think that there is also pressure on men to be a good provider, to be a good, to be a good father, to be a good employee, what that looks like. I think they probably end up in different spaces, but I think there probably is. But again, I'm not a man, so I guess I can't speak to that entirely. But I think that the reason is certainly it is written from a woman's perspective, and there are lots of women that relate to it. But what I will tell you is, of the men that I know that have read it, I've heard it helped me understand the women in my life much better, right? It helped me understand where these things come from. It helps me understand what their perspective is. It helps me understand the pressure that they've put on themselves. And I also think that, I've had men that read it again that say they didn't show up in the same way, but the themes that you talk about are certainly themes that I resonate to. The desire to be enough for other people, the desire to have the external validation of earning your space in the world. I think that they are themes that at a deeper level connect to men, but certainly it's probably a much easier connection woman to woman. I would agree.
Curious now, you mentioned the 10 to 15 minute interviews that you're doing. I wasn't aware of that until you brought that up. But have you had any men in those interviews?
No, not yet. I've done probably 8 so far that I've posted. I just started this week. This past week was my first reader of the week. So I'm doing reader of the week sessions. But mainly it's people that have reached out to me that said this book really resonated with me. And so far, those have mostly been women.
Yeah, right. And that's kind of what I'm thinking. And for people who are watching, just so nobody mistakes, I'm not criticizing the lack of men.
Yeah, no.
Just kind of curious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you talk about Grey's Anatomy fairly extensively for a book like this.
More, actually, less than I would have liked to. My editor made me take a lot out. So.
Okay, I'm also a fan.
Okay.
Although I'm still watching now. It's really gotten to the point now where I think I'm watching just because I've been watching so long. I need to see how it all ends.
Ted, tonight is Jackson and April together. So he's going to her house. So I'm pretty excited after our interview to watch me some Grey's Anatomy tonight. So yeah.
All right. So there was one thing that caught my eye fairly early in the book. You refer to your dark and twisty side. Mm-hmm. That's something that the one character, Meredith Grey, always says. So you took that from her?
Yes.
So I think you said something like you have a friend,
Courtney,
who not only understands but loves you even more for it, or something.
My dark and twisty. That. Yep, absolutely. She's my Grey's Anatomy friend that sort of dragged me over to the side. It sort of made us become best friends and roommates and all sorts of things. Yeah, has a special place in my heart.
Okay, maybe in some way the most important words in the book. And I think you'd probably say the most important words of the book are "You are enough." But I looked at "I'm fine" or variations on that. I don't know. What do you think about that idea of being the most important words?
I think that's fair. In my professional circle, my business partner, Mark, and the woman we work with, Betty, they always say that my famous line is, "It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Everything's going to be great. It's going to be fine." Those are pretty famous words that I tend to mutter, which means I'm completely overwhelmed. I have no idea how I'm going to pull this off. I have no idea how I'm going to manage my life, but it's going to be great. It's going to be fine. So it was that continued just brushing off of, no, this is what everyone does. Everyone's this stressed out. Everyone's this tired. Everyone's got this much going on, and really never giving cadence to say, but do we have to be this tired? Do we have to be this stressed out? Do we? And certainly you can't get rid of, we're all, many of us are still dealing with effects of COVID. We still have many people who are two parents working from home with with children that are going, through virtual school. I mean, there's all sorts of things that people are still dealing with, but it's really about saying, what in this circumstance can I control to make it better? And really taking some time. It's like in the part I talk about the Lorax, right? Which was when the Onceler says to the Lorax, which way does a tree fall? And he says, down. And he's like, no, a tree falls the way it leans. Be careful which way you lean. And as I was, I heard the Lorax while my kids were watching it, and I thought, oh my gosh, like I am leaning so hard into stress and to frustration and to the whirlwind. And maybe I have a different choice than succumbing to all those things. I had one of my Wolfpack members, we were trying to get together outside, socially distanced, now that winter is over. And she had asked, she picked a weekend. I said, you know what? I said, we actually, we have some stuff we're doing on that Saturday. I said, I'm trying to no longer make 2 sets of plans on a weekend. So can we pick a different weekend? And before, I never would have done that. I would have said, oh yeah, no, that's fine. That'll be great. And then I would have gone to meet them, and I would have felt guilty about not spending time with my kids and the things I should have been doing instead. So I would have gone to do something. I wouldn't have enjoyed my space with them. And I would have been bummed that I had made plans so I couldn't spend time with my kids. So I would have made a decision that left me in no real win, instead of taking a minute and saying, what do I want out of my weekend? What do I want? How do I want to spend my time? And you can simply say, let's do another weekend. And she was like, okay, great. She's like, I love that. I'm going to start doing that too. But I never would have taken that pause before to really consider, maybe I don't have to jam pack my weekends quite so crazy, right? Maybe I have more control over my life than I've given myself credit for. And I think that was a big realization for me, and that continued certainly during the pandemic as well.
Actually, I have a card on the Lorax, and that line from the book. I didn't know if I was going to get to it or not, but since you brought it up, I am. And another thing I don't know if I'm going to get to with you is you talk at one point about making connections between things. It's something I do all the time. I'm always making connections between this thing that happened over here and this thing. Mm-hmm. With the interviews I've been doing, it's kind of fun for me starting to see connections between things. But I did an interview with Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha. She wrote a book called What the Eyes Don't See, about the problem with lead in the water in Flint, Michigan. And she was the one who basically made something happen. But at that interview, I brought a copy of the Lorax, and I showed it to the audience, and I said, if you don't have time to read this book, read the Lorax, and you'll get the same message.
It's so true. It is so true. I love that. My other favorite Dr. Seuss book, book or story, is Gertrude McFuzz. Do you know that one?
I don't.
Oh, it's so good. It's about this little bird who only has one tail feather, and she's very jealous of Lola Lilou, who has 2 tail feathers. And so she goes on this adventure to get more tail feathers, and then it ends up being a problem, of course, and then goes back to at the end of the book, realizing that her one tail feather was just fine. So not, again, probably the version of Enough Already right. in my Dr. Seuss parallel, much like her Dr. Seuss parallel, but that's certainly my own.
I like that. Although I'm a little disconcerted that I didn't know the book. I would have said I know all the Dr. Seuss books.
It's one of my favorites for sure.
Okay, you started the book. You said the title and a lot of the book kind of burst out of you.
It did.
But the whole thing didn't. And you ran into some challenges. And you worked with Stacey Ennis, who you have other connections
I love and adore and is fabulous. Yes.
Can you just tell people a little bit about her and her role in your book?
Yeah. So she, again, I'm a big believer, as we talked about the universe and life and all those things, that if you are, that the universe and life is smarter than us. And so sometimes you just have to walk through the doors that life presents you and be brave enough, right, to walk the path, even if you don't know exactly where you're going. But when that gut feeling tells you you're doing the right things, to continue following it bravely. And that was really what this book was all about. As I sort of sat down and I thought, I gotta write a book. Like what is, like, why am I bothering doing this? And it was lots of late nights after I put my kids to bed and lots of early mornings. I'm like, not an author. Like, I'm not, like, who's ever going to read this book kind of thing. But all of a sudden I was 30,000 words in and I thought, I'm writing a book. Like, this is pretty cool. Right. And I was pretty excited, but it kind of got to a point where I had it was the end of my burnout journey. And I really needed to articulate the sort of after the burnout and the recovery and the turning point of now what? And I was really struggling to find my voice and to figure out, because I didn't want it to be here's 10 steps to how do you can not have this. And I was really struggling to figure out what I wanted my message to be and how I could share insight that didn't seem preachy and didn't seem self-absorbed and didn't seem like I had all the answers, because I certainly don't have all the answers. But I know that keeping these conversations to myself is not the answer. I know that engaging in community and creating relationships where we can have these conversations is the right path, at least for me. And so at the very same time as I was going through this journey, Stacey Ennis, who works in the same professional network we do and has written dozens and dozens of books. She has a best-selling book with a gentleman named Ron Price in our industry. And we actually use it in one of our leadership trainings.
Growing influence.
Yeah, growing influence, exactly. So she was doing virtual nonfiction book school, and so it really became this test of it was a pretty big investment in dollars, especially during a global pandemic. And so it was really I thought that this would be a really great way to invest in myself, invest in the journey, and to walk bravely through the path life was pointing me on, so that I could end up, because again I'd never written a book before. I had never planned on writing a book. But it sort of was kinsman of the way it all lined up. And she actually has a nonfiction book school right now that people should attend, because it's really fabulous. So
hey, you were talking there, you mentioned your journey. Near the end of the book, you get to a point where you were trying to figure out how to circle back to the beginning of this, and you were struggling with it until you figured it out. Can you tell people about that?
So, right, like all good books, so the book starts where I'm in a doctor's office. And so like good books and good movies, like they all circle back to the beginning, right? And they tie it all together and they put a pretty little bow on it. And so I sort of had a placeholder at the end of the book, was like, back to the doctor's office was like my placeholder for how I'm going to end the book. And the more I wrote, I was like, it just doesn't, it doesn't tie back. Like there's no way to tie it back. And what I eventually began to realize is because it's been a journey. It's been a bumpy and a curvy one, but it's been a journey forward, not a circle back. And so it really wasn't, there wasn't a way to say, and now I'm back at the beginning, or now it's all come full circle, because it really hasn't, because it's been such a clear path forward into the type of life that I want and the type of relationships I want and the connections that I want and the conversations that I want, that it doesn't tie back. And I think that that's okay, right? To recognize the validity of the path you've been on, but to continue forward on a different one. So
I think another important idea that comes out is you're on a journey, but the journey's not over either. This goes back to that guilt as an alarm, that you haven't found the end. You've just found a way to continue.
Yes. Well, and you'd asked about that superpower before, and really the realization was I was always so overcome with guilt that it was just a sort of a constant state of being. It didn't tell me anything. It didn't help me in any way other than just the weight. But what I've realized now is that now that I have a healthier balance of the expectations I put on myself, now that I engage in my life in a different way, what I've realized is that when I feel guilt, like I was coming up from work a couple months ago from the basement to work, and I was like, man, like I feel so guilty. I haven't seen the kids very much, and like, the bad mom tape started to play, and I was like, nope, don't listen to that tape. Like, change the tape. Like, blah blah blah. And I was like, no, actually, like you haven't seen your kids a lot. Like you have been working a ton, and so maybe the guilt is now a trigger to say, hey, things are out of whack and out of balance. And so it's become a way for me to really do a gut check to say, are things as aligned as you want them to be? Are you living your life in the way you want to? Are you being caught up in that whirlwind again? So it's become, I think, a superpower for me to be able to say, something's off here and I need to realign to be creating the life I want, not managing the life I've got again. So, because it is easy to slip back into that pattern, especially during a global pandemic, for sure. So
now, there's one thing you seem to have in your life that is very practical, but is bigger than that. The one thing that seems like is pleasure for you, but comes with no guilt at all, and that's bread making.
Yeah, man. I love to make some bread. That and sunrise walks. Those are the two things that there is no guilt. They bring me the utmost joy. And here's the thing, like no family member is ever upset when I've made fresh made bread. That is my daughter calls it mommy's bread, and because she's been eating it since she was like very little. And she's kind of a bread snob now, and she won't really eat regular bread, which I actually kind of feel bad about now because I feel like she's going to need to learn to eat real bread. But I have a household full of people that love fresh made bread.
Okay, so we just did find out there is bread guilt now.
well, maybe that I've spoiled her a little on the good bread, yes, but certainly not in making it because it's a household favorite and one of mine too.
Yeah, another book recommendation for you.
Yeah.
As somebody who likes making bread, you're almost sure to like this. It's called In Search of the Perfect Loaf.
Ooh.
By Samuel Fromartz.
All right.
Very interesting book.
I love that. All right. In Search of the Perfect Loaf. Got it.
Okay, you talk about your grandmother, Bobby.
Yeah.
And you say she could be a book of herself. And as I was reading this, I thought, is this another book for Lindsey to write? It seems like a natural.
Oh, I don't know. She'd probably haunt me if I wrote a book about if I wrote a book and told all her stories. If I told all her secrets, she'd probably haunt me. So probably not.
Yeah, well, if nothing else, why don't you tell people the story of your grandmother's plant at least?
Yeah, so she was my very best friend in the whole world. And I used to sneak home from Central on weekends. She lived about a half an hour from our house, and Central was about 2.5 hours away. So I would sneak home on weekends and not tell anyone else in my family I was home. And I would just stay at her house for the weekend and hang out with her. And we'd watch Law and Order together. And we watch skating tapes from 1989, the Olympics. And she was a pretty fabulous lady. I loved her. We do puzzles, and she's awesome. And so when she passed away in 2007, somebody had given us a plant at the funeral. And so I took that plant, and it sort of traveled with me over, I don't know, nearing a dozen homes and locations in homes at this point, which plants don't typically do very well with. But this plant is stubborn, man, just like she is. She was Polish and stubborn, and this plant is every bit of her. And so when I sort of had the plant in the same container for a really long time, since we've moved here, probably 4 years. So I'd been in this same container for a very long time. And it was fine. It was thriving. It was fine. But then I had found some new pots that I really wanted. And so I split up the plant so that I could put it in all these different pots. And within the week, I swear to you, Ted, like all of these tiny green sprouts came out, and the plant just blossomed and it exploded, and it was so beautiful. And I thought, how telling of my journey it had been, right? The plant was doing fine. It was sitting there. It was fine when it was in its pot and crammed, and I wasn't transplanting it nearly as much as I should have been. That idea of self-care, right? Also in the theme in the book of not really taking care of myself well enough and validating that self-care issue. And once I gave it more room, once I had put it in different pots, I gave it new soil, this plant exploded in beauty and greenness and wonderfulness, and sort of found a new life all of its own. And that's really how my journey had felt, is like once I gave myself some space from the weight, from the guilt, from the external validation, once I just let myself breathe a little bit, my life felt very much the same way. Like it was a whole new life that I was living in, a whole new way that I was operating every single day. It felt just as exciting and green and new as the plant had become. So
I think I just heard another book for you. One of those 20-minute books on management or life. Yeah, I see this plant in the title. I'm fine.
Yeah,
and the plant moves from one pot. And,
it's true. Who moved my plant? Maybe that's what I'll call it.
Who moved my plant? Right. Okay. This is pure curiosity here.
Yes.
But there's a point where you say something about sticking it in my toes. I've never heard that before. What does that mean?
So it means you sort of put your game face on, right? So like whatever emotion I'm having, I stick it so far down that emotion goes in my toes, right?
Okay.
It's never to be seen. So I'm going to stick it in my toes. Yes.
Is that a Michigan thing?
I don't know. It's funny. I have a number of Maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of things that I've either said or I've been in Maryland about a decade now, and there's a lot of things we say differently that you would never know. So so maybe it is a Michigan thing. Who knows?
Yeah, I lived that. In my life, I came from the Pittsburgh area and used to go back to my grandparents there for many years. And I came to Maryland with some names for things that people didn't use in Maryland, and sometimes caused confusion.
Yeah. And that's not even that far from Maryland.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah. But definitely different stuff.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. You talk about self-care a lot as you move into the book. And I think, you kind of captured the big idea in one sentence. Self-care isn't an activity. It's a belief that you're worthy of caring for yourself. And one thing you talked about there that I thought was really good for explaining it was the TAP class you were taking.
Mm.
Can you tell us a little bit about TAP and how much self-care you were getting from it?
Oh yeah, so much self-care in that TAP class for sure. So so when I was younger, I took jazz, tap, ballet, and toe for 14 years, and I remember loving it and how magical and wonderful it was. And so when I was sort of on this journey, I was thinking back to like, when was the last time I felt like really like myself? When was I really like thriving in that space? And when was I really happy? And it was definitely when I was on stage and I'm a big like fan of like flapper eras and vintage beauties and all those things. And so being in some like tap shoes and some sequins, like that's right up my alley, like big old vintage earrings and all that stuff. So I was like, you know what? Like, I need some self-care in my life. Like I need some time for me. So I'm going to sign up for a tap class. And I think that that's very true is oftentimes we think like, hey, I'm feeling really burnt out or I'm feeling really overwhelmed or I'm feeling really tired. So I'm going to do something and I talk about in the book from a woman named Valerie Burton in her book. It's all about time, I think. And where this idea of like, if I just go do this one thing, it's going to recharge my batteries and make me feel better. Right. And so I was like, hey, well, if I go take this tap class, like that's self-care, like that's going to make me feel better. And what I didn't realize is that what it really looked like was me getting home from work, trying to shove some, trying to make dinner for my kids, shove food in their mouth, throwing on some tap clothes and digging through a closet to find a dance bag, and then leaving my kids at bedtime when they're crying for their mom. And I'm like, nope, I gotta go do my self-care. Right. And so I left I would feel guilty the whole way to tap class. I would feel like a failure in tap because tap is really hard. Like I forgot how hard tap is. Like if you're to be good at it, it is a lot of coordination that I haven't used in a long time. So it was difficult. I hadn't practiced over the week to week that I should have to learn the bomberche step that I needed to. And then I'd leave at, 9:30 or 9:45 at night to drive home feeling exhausted and wondering why I didn't feel recharged and energized. Because oftentimes we do create these ideas of what self-care looks like, but we check boxes of self-care instead of saying, I like self-care is doing whatever takes care of me in this moment and this real belief that I am worthy of rest. I'm worthy to just take a pause. And in my interviews, probably the vignette I always ask people is there like a vignette or two that stands out to you that you really connected with? And almost every person talks about the vertical farming vignette and how this idea of, I was listening to an audio podcast and they were saying that when they have vertical farming indoors, they can control the climate and every single thing about a plant's growth. The thing that helps plants grow the most is when they shut the lights off and they just let plants rest overnight. And I thought, oh my gosh, well, if plants need to rest for 6 to 8 hours at night, certainly we as people need rest too. And it really helped me realize that even though I was checking the boxes of self-care, I was not doing anything to actually care for myself, nor was I allowing myself to just feel good about taking care of myself. I was doing the activity while feeling guilty about the activity, which doubles down on the guilt and the stress and doesn't really do anything to make you feel more cared for. So really shifting my perspective of what is self-care and what does it mean and look like for me, and how do I really tap into that in a more meaningful way?
Okay, well, our time is winding down. So
Yes.
One last thing.
Yes.
Okay, so the big thing here, you are enough.
Yeah.
And you period, are period, enough period.
Correct.
I got to wondering if you just say, okay, whatever I am, wherever I am is enough. What does that mean for striving for something and achieving something? And I know you're going to say for you, you're not wired in a way that would allow you to say, okay, I'm enough, so I'm not going to do anything. But what about people who aren't wired like you? What does that mean?
So I think to me, it means there's a difference between saying like, to me, I am enough means that I don't need to do other things to get validated by other people. I'm going to do things that are true to me. I'm going to do things that matter to me. I'm going to do things that I am connected to. And so I always think about, I really quickly, I heard Matt Damon give an interview about the first Oscar that he won. And he said, after the big fanfare, he's like, I took the Oscar back and I sat down with it on my coffee table. My girlfriend had already gone to bed. It was just me and my Oscar on my coffee table. And he thought, is this really what people make such a big deal about? Like this is what people spend their whole careers searching after. And to me, it was such a pivotal moment of how we attach success, we attach happiness. Like, I'll be happy when, I'll be successful when, I'll be good enough when, right? There's all these strings that are attached to the getting to that place. And the reality is that even if you achieve that success, even if you get to that place, if you don't feel like you're enough already, if you don't have that internal enoughness, those things still won't feel like success, and they still won't feel like you've gotten to where you want to get to. So even if you are striving, it's that internal space that has to happen first for any of those other things to even really sink in or matter.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing this. I think Lisa wants to pop back in here now.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a wonderful conversation. I actually had a couple questions that were messaged to me. Let's see. Lindsey, what is your advice for someone who finds themselves in the bathroom floor moment right now?
Right now.
And they can't see out of the moment. What would you advise them?
That's a really good question. Again, I am not a therapist. I am not a mental health professional. So if you feel like you need one, my first suggestion would be to go find one and go talk to one. I talk multiple parts in my book about how I've gone to therapy in multiple times in my life because I felt like I was having those moments where I couldn't see those lights and I couldn't figure out how to get out of the situation I was in. And so I'm a big advocate of mental health. I think everyone should go to therapy. I think if everyone did, the world would be very different. And so I would say if you are in that space right now, reaching out to someone can be a really powerful thing just to give you perspective. After my moment, I had like one session with her and she just gave me enough to be able to sort of figure out the journey the rest of the way up by myself. So my first would be, if you think you need to talk to someone, please do that. But the second would be to find someone in your life that you can connect to and talk to about that, because it is really hard for us to see the forest for the trees when we're in it ourselves. And if you have someone in your life that you can connect to, I would recommend finding those sorts of people. And the third is to really recognize, what is that tape you're playing in your head? What is that tape that is telling you whatever that struggle is? And to see if you can decide that you're not going to listen to that tape anymore and that you're going to choose a different tape. Even if you don't believe it at first, I promise you that if you choose the different tape long enough, the belief will come.
If you were to write this book again right now with the pandemic, right in it, and some of it in your rearview mirror, what content would change?
So I actually finished the book in December of 2019. So I wrote it during the pandemic. So honestly, not much would change, because I still think that even though there is so much that is out of our control, we still do get to decide how we show up every day. And we get to decide how much power we give those situations that are around us. And we get to decide, do I stay swept up in the tornado, or do I take 5 minutes at the end of the night and I don't scroll on my phone and I don't watch TV, but instead I pull out a 5-minute yoga video on YouTube, or I sit quietly and I read a book, or I choose a different behavior that gets me closer to where I want to be than I was before. So I don't know that anything would really change that much, especially since I wrote most of it during the pandemic. But yeah.
Okay. I really appreciated your plant metaphor. And a lot of times plants will bloom when they are under extreme stress. which is really interesting because you think, oh, it's doing great. And, it's really a stress and a reaction that the plant's having to defend itself and reproduce. So it's really interesting to think about plants when you think about humans and the conditions we're both under and how we both thrive. One final question for you, Lindsey.
Yes.
If someone wants to purchase your book, how is the best way to do that?
Yes, it is on Amazon. So if you search Lindsey Weigle enough already, it is there both in a Kindle version and a paperback version.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone at home. Again, please remember you're not alone. Reach out if you need help. Thank you, Ted, and thank you, Lindsey. Take care. Be well, everyone.